what we have the ability to is this downtown center is designed to go to that L80 lift station. By oversizing the sanitary sewer, it's we can actually tip the site, potentially drain it north, so it goes to that north or up through that northern corridor. It allows us some flexibility. So as we start to look at down the road, what is that flow going to L80? It gives us that ability to maybe divert some of this downtown area to the north where we have additional capacity. It gives us more alternatives. So as we looked at it, we think it makes sense to upsize that pipe at this time to give us the chance to divert some of that wastewater flow north and relieve some of that capacity long term. And as we looked at, and we looked at those two alignments of running down actually the linear city park along the west side or running down City Center Drive. The recommended approach is to run down City Center Drive. It gives us more flexibility with the St. Therese development and actually a shorter pipe run, hopefully, when it actually comes to implementation. So with the water main, I want to highlight there's a portion of the St. Therese development responsibility where they need to bring water main to the site. So there are some off-site water main improvements that are separate from this report, but will be required as part of St. Therese and the adjacent M&I development. We looked at some on-site alternates for upsizing the water main, whether it's a standard 8-inch loop to service it or an alternative to upsize it. Again, we think with the variability of this downtown city center, upsizing that water main at this time makes sense. It just gives us some additional flexibility with that system long term if we get some higher users. In stormwater, this is one of the goals of when we had originally looked at this areas. When you're looking at these downtown areas, one of the things we like to do is look at where we can a regional stormwater approach. Stormwater ponds can really take up space in some of these areas, and if we can really try to maximize them by putting in logical larger footprints, it can benefit everybody. So we actually looked at 3 alternatives. What would be a stormwater sizing to serve just our city infrastructure? What would that look like if we wanted to do maybe a sub-regional type approach where we're treating the roadways, those city infrastructure improvements, as well as the St. Therese, this site? And then overall, how big can we make it to maybe serve some of these areas, future development to the south? As we looked at that, we think on the interim here, it makes sense to size it for the city site and St. Therese. In preliminary discussions, they seem on board with that. Not only does it make sense for the stormwater between the two sites, but as I talked about before, the mass grading, sharing dirt between looking at this site holistically would bring cost savings to both parties. And then the preliminary assessment role. So the city right now is in the process of obtaining letters of benefits for the property. But the city policy doesn't directly speak to this, this exact scenario. So we've made some assumptions, but it's really one of the policy discussions we want to have after this presentation. Within the city policy, reconstruction streets are assessed at 90% of the low end of the range. And so as we did the Appaloosa Woods and Corcoran Trail projects, those were, the methodology that was used. The policy talks about new developments are not assessed, and they're typically the developer responsibility, which is true. This kind of falls in between with it kind of being a partnership per se between the city and the developer. So one of the things we want to talk about is how do we, when we get those letter of benefits, really what's the right process that we can assign those costs going forward. One other thing to highlight in that discussion is, as you can see in the picture on the right-hand side, is there's a couple of single-family lots that are within this project area, and just how does the council want to treat those as well, with the benefit received from this roadway. One thing I also want to highlight is we're proposing to assess the roadway costs only, so it wouldn't be the sewer or the utilities or the stormwater. It would just be the roadway portion of the cost for having that main corridor available to those developments for access.
Can I
We'll
ask
also
you a
highlight,
question?
there's some properties to the south, sorry about that. There's some properties to the south that, we're not sure
Can you
about,
hear
so we're
us?
getting a letter benefit to those to see what, if any, benefit would be received from those. If they come back, to have a benefit, we would include them in the preliminary assessment roll.
Hey, Steve.
Yep.
Got a couple of questions from council here.
I picked one. Those properties to the south of City Hall, I just wanna, I don't wanna get too focused on the details, but they live on a road. Would they, did you say they'd have a benefit from having a road go behind them?
No, sorry. We're not sure what the letter, we're not sure what it will say, but, they would not have direct access. You're right, they would not have direct access to this roadway.
Okay. Okay.
May I ask a question?
One of the questions from staff to council is to consider not assessing those smaller properties. What happens when the 429 is established and all of a sudden those properties are now owned by the larger developers around them? They're still not accessible?
Correct. So Mayor and Council, with the 429 process, you have one time to do it, essentially. You're establishing who it is. What's not shown on this map is our design guidelines, which were talked about, I guess, a little bit earlier. About half of those properties would be linear park. So we have that 130-some feet off of 116 that would be linear park. So it really would cut the 2-acre lot into a 1 acre. So likely what would happen is these two properties would be eaten up by a larger property. Now, that being said, one just changed hands in the past 3 months and was sold to a new owner, so I'm not sure entirely of that. But this would be our one and only opportunity to do so.
Thank you.
Have they seen the linear park plans before they bought the house?
I talked to the realtor. That's all I can say. All right, Steve, go ahead.
I had a question, follow-up question, sorry. You said this is the one opportunity we can do this. Can it be mandated on the current owner, to Alan's point, where it's like we don't assess as long as it's the current owner, if ownership changes, this is the assessment, can we do it that way?
Mayor and Council, short answer is no. You could do a deferred assessment at time of sale. So I guess that would be one way to do it, I guess. That just exactly, do it deferred to time of sale. Now, what Steve probably doesn't know is we did get letters of benefits for these, and they were relatively small, a few $1,000s. So it just depends on whether you'd want to go through a process for a relatively small amount of money for these couple properties. But I guess the answer is yes.
We would have to change town policy in aggregate to assess somebody a deferred benefit upon the sale, right? Because we had this discussion like 3 years ago, where they'd have stackable, other towns stack the benefit, so like essentially the property value stays exactly the same because they owe all this benefit stacked up on top of each other. And I thought we had a discussion and we decided that was not gonna be what we do.
We may have on certain projects. With this, I would probably say it's likely. For example, the bigger piece, the 76-acre piece, it was owned by the Washex, now it's owned by a different property owner. If we go through the assessment process, one of the likely appeals would be, well, first, I think it's too big probably, and even if I don't think it's too big, I'd like you to defer it, because until I sell this property, I don't have money to pay it. So they still could request a deferment, and ultimately, that's up to the council per project to decide if they want to do a deferral.
Oh, okay. So here we just gonna decide on the assessment, but we could waive it, defer it, depending on council action in the future. So for the smaller, so if it still stays with the small, as a small lot with an independent owner, we could always waive it on council if it comes back and we say we not electing this assessment.
We'd be better off to defer it to sale.
Okay. Fair enough.
And so what we're asking these items so we can finalize the feasibility study and then proceed forward with a potential hearing at that.
So we're not discussing these strategies at all, it's just,
I'd say anything is acceptable. I think first and foremost after Steve gets done is this is a whole new council that hasn't talked about even doing this big project. So it's whether, this is still a priority of the council would be probably a good starting point. But I think any direction is good, but as far as deferring or not, that would be really probably a more future conversation with our finance plan. It would result in a change in bonding, for example. If we had to bond, we'd need to cover the deferred portions of the assessment.
We just had a deferred assessment that was like 20 years old, 30 years old, and we waived the whole thing. So like,
No, we waived part of the
We-
interest.
yeah,
We waived part of the
sorry,
interest.
we waived a big chunk of it, which was appropriate. But like, there are all kinds of things that are gonna go into the conversation about assessing bare lands for potential rise in value or existing rise in value because there's growth.
I mean, it's part of the conversation tonight, cause it's looking for, staff's looking for guidance as part one, right? An establishment of approach. Part of regards to property type. So, I mean, we don't have to get into the weeds, we just have to get some like guidance.
Yep.
Now, if you can find where we left off in the
Yeah.
script.
I think it's a good, I think Steve's just wrapping up actually, so.
Yeah, I mean, so that was kind of the I know I ran through it fast, but as Brad alluded to, it's a big project. So as far as like the project scope itself, were there any questions?
Questions in terms of the scope specifically?
Not for myself, we've been talking about this for a couple years.
Any other questions?
So, being new to the issue, I did have one question. Looking at the location of the stormwater pond, this was one of the slides. I go back maybe 3 or 4 slides. A little farther, a little farther. Okay, there you go. Just a quick question. I know there's going to be that linear park idea along 116. I'm not sure if the topography works, but I was curious if you could do the retention pond that's currently on the east side of Senior Center Drive on the west side, so it sort of merges into the park to create a little bit more green space. That might not be practical from a hydrological perspective, but I just wanted to confirm whether that's an option or not.
I'll let Kevin and Steve talk about from a hydrological or just possibility. From a vision standpoint, one would be less and eat into the St. Therese property, and whether they could do a future expansion in the future would be number one. And then I guess I don't know how that would work within the lineal park. I think that'd be challenging to enhance the current division, but I understand it, the ponds are sometimes viewed as an amenity. Steve, any hydrological information or sizing?
No, from a implementation side, we could do it, but as Brad alluded to, that was St. Therese and they're through their concept plan, so that is their property. So from the time being, we showed it on the east side because I think that'll remain within the city control.
I think from a, just to add on to that, from a staff perspective, we kind of view the same thing as amenity. If you're walking along the parkway, there's a nice kind of pond to look at, and then the woods behind that. So I think, I agree with what you're saying.
And one last quick thing from Kevin here, is that likely with this road, it will open up the sight lines of that wetland complex. It's hard to tell on this figure, but I think the final look will kind of open up that space across that complex, which I think is fairly hidden with the trees now. So I think hydrologically we could put it anywhere, but I think initial reaction is the east side might be a really good amenity, and open that up for sight lines.
Thanks, Kevin.
Any other questions on the presentation itself or the report? I guess kind of to Brad's point of maybe where to start here is, are we all still on the same page about this? This 3 of us, this is relatively new for, but you 2 have put in a lot of work in the past on this, and I guess I'd kind of open it up to you guys if this is aligning with what your vision for it has been and is. If you're on board, if you think there's some big changes that need to be made, or just what you think of it in general.
I think St. Therese coming to the city is gonna open up a lot of opportunities for development in that part of town. Without it being anchored like that, it would be hard to see development and division of any type of town center or any type of gathering space in the city of Corcoran other than what's currently there. So to have somebody that's willing to put this amount of effort into our city and bring these type of jobs to our community, I think it's gonna be a good thing. I fully support the project.
I'm sort of agnostic to the project. That I was open to whatever the landowners so I wasn't an advocate, but I didn't think it's a bad idea. St. Teresa, or St. Therese, for whatever it's worth, said there was gonna be a coffee shop in the lower level. And I think, and a restaurant, and so like, I think every third person asked me when we can get another restaurant in Corcoran, so I think, just from that selfishly.
There you go.
I would
Good
appreciate
reasons
that
anyhow.
part, but, I like I'm agnostic, but I like it. I think
Gotcha.
it makes sense. They've been good to work with, they're an additive. But I'm not like gonna die on the hill that it has to be that. But, we're so far along in the process, but, I'm curious more so what you guys have to say about it.
I think I can echo you there. Like I don't have one way or the others. Like I'm glad we are having the discussion because I think in part of the strategy sessions we talked about not forcing development into one section of our city. Like let's not focus everything around town center and force development to come there and make it expand. And we had like a lot of discussion around it. So it's good that we're having this discussion. If this is something we still want to proceed with, but having an establishment coming with, I would say it's an addition, and I would definitely take the restaurant. So yeah, I would say just I'm for it to move forward. Yes, in the way it is right now. I would definitely have to look at some of the assessments and things like that. If we can defer some of it for the smaller landowners and things like that, with nuances, right? So which we can figure out as we go. But as a project, I've not heard opposition from it from the polls. I think it is Friday. But yeah, what that's worth. But yeah, so I'm for it.
I like the idea of it developing. I like the type of development that it is. I'm concerned about how expensive it is for the city. When I look at a $3.2 million price tag for a half a mile of road and related utilities and grading, I'm concerned about that. It's a huge amount of investment, and really it'll pay for, if other development happens nearby, the cost would be covered, from what I understand. If development doesn't happen nearby, that's a lot for the city to carry. So I asked Brad ahead of time, with the property tax that we're likely to see just from St. Therese, so the project that's driving all of this, would that support the bonding cost that we would be incurring if we proceed with this? And it sounds like it's kind of close, depending on how much state funding that we're able to get. So I'm nervous about putting out more in bonding to support the project than St. Therese itself will support. If we end up with enough state funding so that it's covering its own costs for bonding, I can support it. If we're having to get out in front of our skis and put the city on the hook for infrastructure that might or might not be used by something else, that I'm more nervous about.
Makes sense. I mean, I think generally I'm kind of where a lot of you guys are. You raised some fair points there, Jeremy, on the cost of it. It certainly is a big price tag for us. Probably one of the biggest projects we've ever done or have coming up, or are looking at. But I would assume the end goal is that it would drive the quality type of development in that area that we'd want, and that would more than pay for itself in that way. I would assume is the goal in the end. And I think St. Therese seems like a great anchor to that type of development, kind of to your point of, without it, would we see the type of development we want and development really at all in that area? And I think it would drive it a lot by having St. Theresa versus nothing there. So I'm in favor of staying the course with the project, and obviously we have to work through all the details, but generally in favor.
We had some discussion back when this first came about the return time on the cost of infrastructure and offsetting taxes, and the return time was small enough to the point where I was comfortable going forward with it.
So should we dive into, there's kind of 5 points in the staff report of direction that staff would like. I think that's probably a pretty good place to go next.
And would you like me to walk through them?
Yeah, that'd be
now?
great. That'd be
Steve went through them briefly. So the first one is regarding the approach for assessing. And as Steve brought up, we really don't have a mechanism exactly itemized out. So the staff recommendation was to use the average of a letter of benefit range. So if you remember, we usually get a letter of benefit that says generally it's from X per square foot to Y per square foot is the benefit. Now in Appaloosa Woods, Corcoran Trail East West, it was a really conservative approach, whereas 90% to the low end of the benefit. So essentially, you're really reducing any potential for a challenge whatsoever. The staff recommendation on this is using really the average of letter of benefit. One, because I think it's using a middle ground. I think it's defendable. We still would allow the person being assessed to appeal that and have a different treatment, but that would be the approach that I would like to use for the feasibility study as well as the assessment role at some point. And then, so the other part would be regarding the two properties. Staff recommendation was to leave them out. What I've heard though is maybe put them in and kind of see how the process goes. Let me know if I've heard wrong on that item.
Which other two are you talking about?
The two 2-acre pieces that are just south of the City Hall property.
Is that all that, just two parcels and the other properties to the south that were mentioned?
Correct. The other property to the south, there's really no benefit.
Gotcha.
Just because they're so far away from the project.
Okay.
Now, if there's another phase of this project, then they're potentially back in the game again.
Right.
I can understand there'd be minimal to no benefit for the existing property owners, but if there's a potential sale of that land, it would probably be to a developer who will reap the benefit from it. So, to me, the deferred assessment makes sense on that.
I would agree.
And the middle range, is everyone okay with just starting at that point from the larger properties?
It makes sense, but here's a question though. Because we've been consistently applying 90% of the lower end so far, would we see a lot of appeals back saying, look at this again? Because there's no point us saying 50% and then we have to get all those applications back and then we're going to start collecting them, right? So, kind of scares me, like, not scare me, but more about do we need to pick up that load?
No, I think if we felt strongly about it, that we should amend our assessment policy, and we can do that at any point in time. So we could do that alongside a parallel process to this project. It really is one property owner in this case, so I don't think it's causing too much work. But I think if we felt strongly, we should amend our assessment policy to be consistent with it.
I think it makes sense to go with the average because the benefit is more for economic gain for that property owner. Having a road and having access opens up opportunities for them. It's not like assessing for, an overlay on a road or blacktopping, Corcoran Trail, east or west. To me, that's a totally different type of project.
And Mayor and Council, I will agree, when the assessment policy was talked about, it actually wasn't as much as defendable. It was, what's the citizen's responsibility versus the greater city's responsibility. So to Councilmember Schultz's point. Thank you.
I'm good with the average.
The second was the regional stormwater, and staff recommends pursuing that option.
Yeah, I guess my question, while reading the staff report, is what's the alternative to that?
Every property owner having to create their own storm pond.
Okay.
Yep.
So, yeah, I'd be in support of that, of the staff recommendation.
Don't we have like a 8-inch pipe there, and we're talking about making it bigger? Is that part of the discussion too?
Steve, I think
That'll
that's
be
more
a
for
that'll be a
water
part of the sanitary sewer discussion, not the stormwater.
So when they put that in originally, it was smaller than
It doesn't
Right.
exist currently.
Oh,
So we would be installing it, but a size that would serve, well, that's actually, I think, the
okay,
next one.
okay.
So in this case, it'd be the pond, so the size of the pond that could take drainage from additional properties. I'm hearing consensus on that.
Yes.
Sanitary sewer is the next one. So, really, and Steve, you can maybe walk over this again, but essentially we have limited capacity at the L80 lift station. So that's the lift station that's near, actually around Cook Lake Highlands in that project. And, we have a certain capacity, and if we, invest this to have, this flow north instead, it frees up additional capacity in southeast. So, essentially, if you flush the toilet at City Hall at some point, it goes past Mama G's, to northeast Corcoran, and it goes out that way. At some point, it tips to L80. And so what this investment would do would actually free up additional sewer capacity for southeast Corcoran with a little investment here to tip a little bit more north, which has much more capacity. Steve, is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Gotcha. And this was the discussion of the 8-inch pipe versus 12-inch.
Correct. Yep. So it'd be upsides from 8-inch with just the standard minimum to a higher capacity to carry that additional flow.
Gotcha.
And Steve, isn't it also a depth issue on that pipe plus a sizing? So not to get too much into the details, but it's really just setting us up for more options later. So as Southeast fills in, the more capacity we can protect, the more, density options we could potentially choose at L80. So it's a $100,000 investment, but when we start, and it depends on timing, but this will be an investment that will be in perpetuity. So we're not just talking a 5-year window. I mean, this is for the rest of Southeast Corcoran. There is a set capacity at that lift station. So if we can make this investment now, staff views it as a valued investment. We're protecting some decisions 10, 20 years down the line.
And I believe the difference in cost from the 8-inch to the 12-inch, depending on which alignment you do, it's not astronomical cost difference for the improved, the bigger 12-inch. I think it's
Cost of pipe probably most of them, right? Because
I would think.
they're digging the trench the same depth no
Right.
matter what.
It would be a
It'll,
negative change.
it'll be a little bit deeper, but yes, it's generally a little bit deeper pipe and the additional size. So.
Okay.
So the alternative would be if we don't do this investment, we get 10 years, 5, 10 years, 20 years down the line, and we reach capacity, and there's still undeveloped land, or there's some redevelopment in 25 years where we want to make it more dense, or there's some issue in the future pipe where there's a capacity problem. To then tip sewage to northeast, we would invest in a lift station, we'd install force main, and it would be extremely more expensive than it is today at $100,000. So that when I was kind of guiding towards was this 100,000 goes a long way for flexibility in the future as things in Southeast Corcoran develop.
Next item is really the finance mechanism, and it really is the only way we can do it. We start with assessments and benefit to the properties impacted, and then exhaust MSA funds is our recommendation, and then beyond that, looking at potential bonding. So just wanted to make sure that that would be the approach we would use to finalize the recommended feasibility study, which also, once we know the bonding amount, we can answer the questions better about tax base to cover those bonding amounts too.
Yeah, I think I'm comfortable with that to at least figure out the details and then assess at that point.
Same here.
And then the final is related to City Hall, and that's, staff, we recommend within this project also connecting City Hall to the water and sewer infrastructure as well. There's certainly a cost to that. Actually, our current septic system is on the other side of the road, the south road, so it would likely be impacted by the project anyway. And it sure would be nice to have some drinkable water at City Hall.
No.
Too much to ask.
It makes sense to me too, especially having the requirement on some of the businesses in the area. I think it makes sense for us to also follow suit on that.
A quick question, might be totally unrelated, but I remember there were discussions last year saying that the City Hall in current capacity will not be, this is not going to be the building in a couple of years, and we'll have to look at something else.
Couple years.
I'm throwing it off because I don't remember my memory
Don't
doesn't serve me
put that
right.
in the public.
No, it is out there. I mean, anything we discuss should be in the public.
But it wasn't 2 years. It wasn't 2 years.
I mean, the numbers. That's just I don't remember. But the question is, the location, right? How much of this cost right now would be for short term, mid term, long term, with respect to going this route?
I'd say it's long-term no matter what, so, in general, our ability to use this facility depends on how fast the city grows with staff. We're through, the recent remodel, we'll get through the 2020s. It depends whether this is the future campus forever, or with a portion, maybe moves to a different location, could extend this life. The way I look at it is, something in this area needs water and sewer no matter what.
Right.
So say even if we wanted to move campus someplace else, whatever we could sell this for would be more valuable of having access to water and sewer too, so I think it's reasonable. I would not recommend at this point, we have no fire suppression, but I don't know if it's worthy to put in full fire suppression of City Hall. This would be really hooking up, water and sewer at this point.
I'm good.
Sewer would be impacted as soon as the road comes in, right?
Likely.
Which would be in early stages.
Yeah.
So, we'd have to deal with the sewer issue anyway.
Correct.
And to your point, there's gonna be something here at some point. It's not like we're gonna level the building and leave it a vacant lot. So it makes sense.
Open green space.
Yeah, whether it's this building or a new building in the future, or selling it and moving a campus somewhere else, it would still be worthwhile investment for the property.
Brian Dejewski mentioned the fire hall here like 3.5 years ago during the city council, and somebody asked me yesterday when they're gonna start on the fire hall. And I'm like, so just for the record, this is not moving. It's
Right.
not a 2-year deal.
Here.
We just remodeled it.
Yep.
We have to be careful about what we
The,
say.
the only time I heard that was when I was on the other side of the fence. This is last year. Right? I was on the other side of the fence when I heard this, so I'm like, now
just
I'm sitting on this
remodeled
side, I'm like,
Happy and we're comfy.
can I get
Yeah,
that on the record that we are not moving?
The people will ask. You'll regret
Y'all good?
bringing that 2-year timetable.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Then we'll move on to 10, which is new business, Stieg Road transportation improvements. We do have a public comment opportunity. Start that.
And Paul Hoyer with Pulte would like to speak to the council.
Sounds good.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. I'm Paul Hoyer, Pulte Homes, 7500 Flying Cloud Drive, Suite 670, Eden Prairie, Minnesota, 55344. It's good to be here this evening. I haven't seen you since, I think it was January, when we brought our Bellwether and Amberley concept plan for your review. It's nice to be here in person. I'm going to be really short here tonight. It's been a long meeting. I recognize that. With me this evening, we have the landowner, Larry Van Blaricom, and also Jeff DeCesar, the broker for the property. I submitted a letter. I'm not going to walk through everything that I put in the letter. To some degree, it's kind of looking forward into the future. I realize your discussion tonight is limited, but I wanted to provide some context and some details as we're working towards solutions that give the city the goals, meeting the goals that the city's looking for, as well as having the project move forward in the application.
Did we get a copy of the letter? Sorry to.
It was emailed
Sorry,
out.
emailed it out.
Okay. Sorry about that. Maybe you wanna talk about it. I didn't get a chance to read it.
I don't want to take too much of your time, but I really outlined what I thought was a solution that provides the city with all the goals that I believe I've heard from staff and city council in the past, yet allows the project to move forward. I realize your discussion tonight is really about whether or not you wish to undertake a public improvement project with potential assessments or those sorts of things. The solution that I put forward does not include a public improvement project. You certainly could take one on. I'm just assuming that it's your goal to probably not take on a public improvement project and to assess people. So I'm always looking for the path of least resistance. I try to find win-wins, otherwise things don't move forward. And I provided a solution in the letter that went out yesterday that really lays out a way to give you everything that you're looking for, but allows our project to move forward. And I think we'll probably have a discussion about that at the July 22nd meeting when you see our preliminary plat application. But also, I'd be happy to meet with you on the side between now and then, take a call from you, and discuss this in more detail. But I'm also here to answer any questions you might have tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
I hate to break it to you that if you think this is a long meeting,
Yeah, you haven't
You're in
been to
for
enough of
another
ours. We usually start at 5:30.
thank you.
I was surprised we were not starting today at 5:30.
Yeah, I
You-
thought it was a mistake.
But
Well, we're not done yet, are we?
yeah, that's true.
So Mayor and Council, Paul did a great job, teeing up the conversation piece, and that's really what it is. I will say, the letter really included a, position where Pulte would be responsible for improving the road from the existing Bellwether development through the length of the Van Blaricom piece, and I gotta find a pointer or something that works, but essentially to the extent of the development on the west. And then paving the remaining portion of Stieg Road in a lower profile, essentially what's there, maybe some soil corrections if needed, and then putting pavement on. And then restriping turn lanes on 116 versus creating pavement to support brand new turn lanes on 116. And we've had some initial review internally with that position, and we'll be bringing forward that review to council and whether we can support that. I think it's a significant move on their part. I think it does meet nearly all the goals that we talked to them about when they first came in. There's some county permits that would need to be secured, so the turn lanes are probably the most threatened portion there. But the true ask of the council is, should the city be involved with some sort of approach? So when this project goes forward, and say it goes forward, and you have the nice 3-lane, you have your east-west and continuous left turn lane in the middle that goes to all of Stieg Road, but the remaining quarter mile. And that would be really the approach of it. And this development, I'm in agreement, can't support the finances to finish the project essentially. So if this moves forward and say nothing else does for a long time, that would be the roadway for a long, long time. Or the city council could say, you know what, this is an opportunity to jump in, finish the project, and proceed forward. As I wrote in the staff report, that we really don't have any funds, especially if we move forward with the city center drive. We're out of MSA funds at that point. We potentially could even borrow ahead 5 years to help out with that, which means we don't have MSA funds for 5 years after that. So it likely would be a bonding initiative. This road certainly serves more than this Van Blaricom piece. No one's arguing that. But that's really the specific ask of the council's directions to staff. So when you finish our study, bringing it to council, what does the project look like? I will note, since there are 2 planning commissioners on the call right now, we've punted on this for the planning commission review on July 1st next week. The July 1st review talks about the feasibility study with the full improvement being recommended by the engineering team. We're hoping planning kind of focuses on the overall design of the community and those types of things, and really what's acceptable from a financing mechanism and policy from what the road looks like. I think we can defer that to the city council meeting on July 22nd, but I wanted to address that since we had Jim and Dean on the line listen to this conversation tonight. So I'll stop there. Again, Paul did a great job teeing it up. I agree with what he's saying there, and happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Brad?
Yeah, didn't we, we elected last time to not continue the paving and leave that dirt basically at Dennis Lee's driveway. As a city, we decided we weren't gonna go further and we let development finish the road, which is close. But is the question whether we let them exchange putting turn lanes on 116 for just finishing the road? Is that the gist of it, or what's the gist of it?
No, so Mayor and Council, you're correct. When the project had come through previously, that's why we stopped at the half-mile mark, and some people think, why would you stop at a gravel road right there? And it was for this purpose, right? Development would pay as it marches down. What Paul is talking about is a solution that he believes meets the intent of the feasibility report, which says that turn lanes need to happen on County Road 116. What Paul is stating is he believes there's a width there where you can restripe the pavement rather than adding a whole bunch of new pavement to it. That has to be vetted out. But on top of that, the report initially said this 3-lane road should be extended all the way through to better serve this neighborhood. And I'm not directly looking up Paul's spreadsheets, but just on anecdotally, you have 192 lots to put all those costs on. It's pretty believable to say that that can't pay for the entire 3-lane approach moving forward. So what Paul has brought forward is a win-win in that I have drawn a line in the sand saying I can't put a couple hundred more cars a day on gravel. So we have to have a pave for the rest of it. And the solution he's presenting is let's pave what's there, a find a way to have an affordable version of turn lanes in 116 and have a really good road, a better improved road that does need to get vetted out by engineering. We will be vetting out that proposal before it comes to council. But that's, if you want to comment on that, I think that'd be a great time to comment on it now. But for me personally, it's the how should I finish the feasibility study? Is there a desire to invest public funds to just finish this now, or potentially wait? Now, the potentially wait is a bit limited. The only remaining large parcel is, I'll call it, the STIEG property on the north side. And essentially we'd have to do some sort of study saying now that that traffic is added, it should be finished because now it needs to be that full 3-lane design. And that's what the feasibility study will determine, whether the Pulte-Pauls approach is an interim acceptable solution until there's another development taking place.
I guess where I am at is that I don't want to use public funds. Just me, and to quote somebody here, it's like development should pay for itself as it moves through the city. Maybe.
Wise person.
Yes, the wisest person in the room. So I would stop it at that. I would not want to fund that if I had based on how I would vote. With respect to the feasibility of what the turn lanes or what could get through engineering vetting out, like how much could we save to get some paved road there, I have to see it. But definitely not using public funds. I would be very comfortable in stopping it and let another development come and finish it. Because I think that property will get developed. I think that stretch will get completed through that. That's what my head is on.
I have a question on that point, actually. So the remaining parcels along Stieg Road, are those large enough to support what staff feels we need in terms of the county road improvements down the road and continuing from a 2-lane road to a 3-lane road? Or are we going to be having the same problem now where the development that's planned can't afford that infrastructure?
Because I think you're going to have that problem at some point. If the Stieg property would go, and you know, Denny loves that property. I've ridden it 4-wheeler around to this property, and he has no reason to go. It's a beautiful place.
Wait, they just bonded to buy it, City of Rogersville.
Well, that's the woods in Rogers north of this property.
Yeah.
That's Rogers' property, not Corcoran. If that would
You didn't
go,
love that piece.
I rode around that piece too.
It's the nicest piece.
It's a nice piece. That would be probably the biggest trigger to go in. These smaller properties on the south side, there's some acreage there, but there's some wetland, and I don't see the city, if those properties would go alone and not the Stieg Woods, there's no way, there's a finance gap certainly. If the Stieg project were to go, I think there might still be a finance gap, but significantly smaller, and at that point might be reasonable where the city could, this is done. We're not gonna get any more development and there's a gap, and we pushed our policy as far as we could.
Yeah, I'd imagine we'd be running out of road to have that gap on it at a certain point there, so.
And I get that. Like maybe there comes a point where development cannot pay for itself, and then city kind of picks up the rest. I personally don't think we are there yet, because I think that property over there is going to develop. And that's me, right? And that's me just pulling it out of the air, out of a hat. So I'd wait to see that development or what happens with that before I say we pay for it, especially with what we just discussed before and being tapped out to go bond it again. I don't want to put public money behind this.
Can we assess Stieg's property if it's, like, if they pay to the end of their property, Denny's is like a quarter mile back? Can we say, well, if you develop, you're gonna need to finish the end of the road that's not even adjacent to his property? Because there are 3 properties left that are actually on the Stieg Road. North of Stieg Road is an existing neighborhood, not sellable property. So on the map there, you go there and pay, there actually isn't that property to the north, unless we can assess someone back where it's already paved.
Well, I would certainly say that the council could say, right now, we could go get a letter of benefit. We can't from the previous part, that's what's done is done. That goes back to the 429 and one chance of doing it. But with this project alone, you could have a look to see if this project benefits that to assist in the project. I think what we'd look at it from the staff, and this is off initial conversations, is that this feasibility study shows that some improvements are needed due to this project. It may show that Paul's approach is acceptable in the interim. What it likely won't show is that if one more project comes in that's significant, adding a couple hundred more cars, it'll say that the interim solution no longer works. So for that to be allowed to be developed, they would have to contribute towards finishing the ultimate project.
But Paul's interim solution to your point, does it use city fund?
No.
Yeah, so
No, but they have to make, what I read was you have to change like standards or how we kind of do the turn lanes, right? That's where the money is being repurposed from. The win-win, how's the win-win coming about it? Like them extending the pave?
We'll still be building it to engineering standards that we're not replacing this road in 5 years after they've moved on, right? It's just a matter of we're probably not gonna have 3 lanes versus 2, and we're not gonna have curb and gutter on it.
I believe it would be fully built out up to that point of the development, and the rest would be paved, and not the expanded, wider.
We'll just pave the surface of the road after they've improved the sub-base, correct?
Yeah, they would likely have to have some sub-base. It wouldn't be a 40-year road by any means, but likely you could get, 15-ish out of it if nothing else happened.
Right. I'd be open for you to come back and look at it as long as we're doing dedicate public transport.
me and you could repaint 116, the Lions.
I know.
I think as long as it's not a safety concern, which would be figured out when,
Yeah, and that's the review that has to happen here, but it's
Right.
just more, which transportation project are we gonna then view the lens through for the final recommendation to you all? And what I'm hearing is really the staff approach to see if we can potentially make that
Yep.
work and limit any public funds.
I think the wild card is the county, right, on 116.
It
If the
is.
county comes in and says no dice, it's dead.
And on top of this, we're still waiting for the word from Maple Grove to allow for water for it as well, so.
That's always going to be your catch.
alright, is everyone on the same page with that?
Again, really
Jeremy?
no-
If
really
we
no
can do
change in
this
direction.
without signing up taxpayers to fund extension in the future, I would be supportive. If we can live with the road condition that we're describing in this interim plan, long-term, as long as nothing else develops, but it's funding itself, I would be okay with that. I don't wanna sign us up for something where we know in 5 years whether it develops or not, we have to put money into this to finish it. I don't wanna put ourselves in that position.
Agreed.
Who determines that it needs improvement as more homes come in?
If an additional development were to come in?
If an additional development came in, let's say 100 more cars, contract that you said, with the traffic count, who decides at that point? Is it the city's decision?
Correct.
So we could still continue to punt it down the road until we had enough money in the road fund.
We funded 1 million road decisions, by the way.
So we're
That's why
good
we
at
have
it.
so many good roads.
I
But
would
if
feel
another
like this would be a pretty low priority, given that we've got 20 to 30 miles of gravel. I wouldn't wanna put money into paving something just for the sake of doing it, when we have so many residents who complain about dust and their cars getting rusted out. I would feel like, we wouldn't wanna invest money in, given where the rest of our infrastructure is at.
I think we're there, right?
Yeah.
We're all on the same.
I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah, they did.
yes, that's a good, very good point.
Thank you.
You
Perfect.
put the right over.
Paul could prove.
Alrighty, so now we just wait on all the other deciding entities and see what we have. Okay, then that
Thank
is.
you for the work on that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Staff reports, do we actually have a? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to add that, 10B, the maintenance worker.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Kevin, Pat, and Brandon and I interviewed final round for the maintenance worker position. When I say Tuesday, I don't exactly remember anymore. But we actually have a preferred candidate we want to move forward with, and similar to last time, what I'd like to ask the council is an opportunity to authorize the mayor and myself to make a job offer for the maintenance worker position. So this way, we don't have to wait until July 8th to formalize the job offer, bring it back to you, get approval. We can lock in our preferred candidate and move forward.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
Perfect. Staff reports. Do we have a pandemic response update or a planning?
We're here.
No, it's
There you
done.
go.
It's done. It's officially
That works
done.
for me.
Do we need any more pandemic response updates?
No.
No, probably not.
Sweet.
Yes.
Okay, then with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
City council schedule, you wanna talk about that at all or no?
Normally just show up.
If you have any questions, let me know.
Alright. Thank you, thanks guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for coming.
I think we need to adjourn.
Second.
Sorry, who made the motion?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
All right, we're gonna go McKee, Schultz.
That, perfect. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? There we go. Thank you. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks for coming
Great to
out.
see you in person.
Thank you.
Thank you all.